Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Carpenter from Au Pair in America at our headquarters here in Connecticut. Today, I'm excited to chat with Dr. Sarah Ditch, one of our wonderful host moms, about her family's experience with the Au Pair in America program. As a parent who is a healthcare professional, the Ditch family was able to host a new au pair during the COVID-19 pandemic amidst the visa and travel bans because they qualified for a National Interest Exemption waiver or NIE from the US government. Sarah, it is so lovely to have you here with us. Please take a minute to introduce yourself. Where are you from? How many children do you have? And what are your professions?
My husband and I live in San Antonio, Texas, a little bit north of town now, actually. And we have 4 children. They're 10, 8, one just turned 5, and our youngest is about to turn 3. I should know, but I think we are 7th or 8th au pair that we have. So we've been in the program for a really long time. And it's been wonderful for us. I'm a physician. I worked pretty standard hours, and my husband works from home, but he also travels a lot for work. And then he's in the Army, so he is gone on weekends sometimes, and then could unexpectedly need to go. Having an au pair has always helped me being able to be a single parent sometimes when my husband travels.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Are the older kids that you have in school full time? Are they hybrid or virtual at all?
We moved right before COVID happened, which was a huge blessing in disguise because we moved to a larger home. And then we all got stuck there. Having more space was wonderful. At the beginning of COVID, my kids were studying from home went to virtual learning. And then luckily, because we live a little more rurally, it did start in person in August. And they've been in person since. My little 2 go to daycare. So my au pair works like a split schedule. And the daycare closed for about a month or 2. So we were all at home. And then about the time that I started going back to in-person work, the daycare did open back up with a lot of restrictions. We're still not completely back to like normal hours.
That must have made it much easier for you when the daycare closed to have had an au pair.
Oh, absolutely. We've talked as our kids get older, her role evolves. It's still very necessary. My husband and I were very fortunate that our work wasn't affected a ton because of COVID. My husband just kept working because he works from home. But his work is like on calls. Like it's not like something where he could watch the children. We were doing like alternate, like 1 week I was in the office, 1 week home. But it wasn't time off, and I couldn't take time off just because my kids were at home. So yeah, my au pair schedule, and it was our previous au pair who had arrived pre-COVID, and her schedule suddenly changed, but she rolled with it amazingly well. We were able to keep working with no issue with childcare.
That's awesome. So you said that you guys, this is your 7th au pair?
I think number 7.
Somewhere around there. But that's amazing. So you guys are like a professional au pair family at this point.
I feel that way. When I started residency is when we moved to San Antonio, and I begged my husband for an au pair. I don't actually remember how we survived the first year and a half of residency. We only had 2 kids, but my husband did everything. He had to drive them to and from daycare. And if the kids were sick or something, he had to take the day off because I couldn't. And then he got a new job that blessed us with the ability to get an au pair. So again, we only had 2 kids at the time, but it made life so much easier. And his new job was going to require a lot more travel. And so there was no real other way around it.
That's amazing. I'm glad that the program has worked so well for you guys. What makes the Au Pair in America program the best fit for your family?
The flexibility and cost. When I counsel other residents and physicians because going from medical school to residency, the time commitment is a lot different. And things are changing, but when I was a first year resident at my program, I was the only female resident with kids who had a working spouse. There were several others that had kids, but they almost all had a stay-at-home spouse. And so sometimes you were working 12 to 14-hour shifts 6 days a week and had 1 day off. And what do you do for childcare? So the flexibility of that. And you can do a live-in nanny, but you can't also do daycare. I think daycare has some advantages too. We tried. Because before we had an au pair, we had an after-school sitter. The reliability wasn't there because like one day she was just like, oh, by the way, I'm done. I quit. And we were like, can you give us 2 weeks notice? So this is, when you go into the au pair, it's a year-long commitment or more. And there's still some unpredictability things. We've definitely had our challenges, but it's really the only solution for us, which is why when it came time for a new au pair, even though it was during COVID and it was going to be so difficult, we were like, yeah, we have to keep going. Because we had a serious discussion about not trying to find another au pair. And I just didn't see how it was going to happen. We would have had to made some significant changes to our situation with our kids.
Yeah, and we understand that you qualified for National Interest Exemption. So for those of you that are new to the term, shortly after the government announced the presidential proclamation, which included the J-1 visa ban, they also announced the waiver program, which basically exempts families that met one of the three criteria. Either you are a healthcare worker dealing with COVID patients, medical researcher battling COVID, or if a family has a child with particular or special needs and you find an au pair with that exact experience. I talked to a lot of families, and believe it or not, there's so many families that don't even realize that they qualify for NIE. So we're just hoping to get the word out because there's so many families that can benefit from it. And for NIEs, it's obviously easier because the waiver trumps the visa ban and the travel restrictions. What would you say the NIE application process was like for you guys? And how long did it take from the time that you applied to the time that Monica arrived?
Luckily, so COVID started in March. I think that proclamation happened in June. Our au pair's time was up in October, so I had some time. I think we were actually in the interview process when the proclamation came out. I'm very active on a couple of host mom Facebook groups, and one is a physician mom's au pair host mom Facebook group. I was scouring everybody's research and understanding of everything, and we were even we thought it would be over in January, so we were even interviewing saying, hey, our au pair's here till October, if you can't arrive till January, let's keep interviewing. And those connections broke through because I completely understand there was too much uncertainty. So we waited a little while and started interviewing again. Yeah, I think it helps that I was able, because I was hearing stories about it going through for some others. And so, but I think it took a little more confidence and faith that it would work out for Monica to say, yeah, let's go for it. We'll try it.
Where is she from?
Poland.
Oh, cool. Have you always had au pairs from Poland, or have they been from different locations?
She's our first from Poland. We've had several au pairs from Europe and a couple from South America.
Would you say there was a notable difference in the process with NIE as compared to the previous au pairs that you've hosted?
Just that the interview process took a lot longer. And I feel like we're can offer a lot as a host family. That we've done this for a long time. I know what it takes to accommodate and hopefully have them have a good experience. But we have 4 children and we live in Texas, not California or New York. So I know it takes a while before we can set up first interviews, even without COVID and the NIE and travel bans and stuff like that. So the interview process took a lot longer and a little more perseverance. And we were still able to get interviews. It just was a lot longer of a process.
That makes sense. Were you strictly looking at au pairs that were overseas, or were you considering, in-country au pairs as well?
I was hearing from other host families, because some were stuck with in-country au pairs, right, if they didn't qualify for the exception. And I was hearing that was very difficult to match. I was still trying to use the NIE, and not try to match without it, which of course ended up working out very well because I think it was extended a little bit before some au pairs could arrive.
One thing that we've noticed with the NIE waiver is it can actually be a bit quicker for the au pairs to get through the visa application process because they are told at their embassy appointment whether or not they are qualifying for the waiver. So that's actually speeding up the process a little bit, which is nice. Normally the au pairs have to wait until after the embassy appointment to find out whether or not they've been granted the visa. And then we have to book the flight. Another piece of the criteria is that they have to travel within 30 days from the time that they receive the waiver. Let's talk a bit about your hosting experience as a healthcare worker facing the front lines of the pandemic. First, thank you for all that you've done to combat COVID-19. How has hosting an au pair impacted you and your husband professionally?
I feel pretty fortunate. Our previous au pair was really in the thick of it, right? When the quarantine and all that first started. She was very understanding and was happy to, kind of change her lifestyle completely to accommodate everything. I feel very fortunate that we weren't in any situations where we felt unsafe. Our peak came later in Texas. Right. So we had a couple of months to get used to the idea of what was going on before there was kind of a peak. That being said, my previous au pair did catch COVID back in June of 2020, very early. A couple of our family members caught it. Everyone fortunately had a very mild course, but I feel like I kind of got my feet wet and experiencing it at work and at home, like really early in the pandemic. And I don't feel like she was taking any extra risk or anything. It's just that's what's going on. It's a virus spreading around very quickly. But even after that, she still was very respectful of, hey, we still have to wear masks even though you've already had COVID kind of thing. And then our new au pair, we went over, what it was going to be like and rules and stuff like that. And she's been very accommodating to whatever we request. So besides getting ill, it didn't affect my husband professionally very much at all. His work gives unlimited leave related to COVID. While we were ill, was able to take the time off. And then it's changed what work has looked like for me a lot.
That's amazing that you all are doing so well and survived and didn't have it, the worst case scenario, of course. I always say to families who are new in their search, so I typically talk to families when they're making a decision to find out if, to figure out if an au pair is a good fit for their family and, talk to them about the application process. And an au pair that's overseas right now that is considering, becoming an au pair or is available to match with the new host family has the right expectations now. How would you say that live-in childcare impacts your ability to do your jobs? I know, especially for your husband who's working from home.
Well, that's the only way we're able to have our current setup is to have live-in childcare. As I said earlier, COVID completely brought to light how important that is. I told you we moved and I live much further from work. If all the driving to activities in school and everything was like that without an au pair, that wouldn't be possible. So, living in our current house wouldn't be possible without live-in childcare. With the more uncertainty because of COVID. So for example, my kids are in person school, which is great, but if they get exposed to COVID while they're at school, they have to virtual learn for 5, 10, 14 days without live-in care. My work won't give me leave because my kid got quarantined. And so that happened. And so it was like, hey, Monica, these are the hours that he needs to log in, and so she's, able to adjust her schedule and my work's not affected. Also right now, what we struggled with a lot too was, things are better now with the testing and the vaccine, but for the whole time when my kids were back at school, every runny nose was like a big deal, right? And I have a 2 and 4-year-old, or at the time I did, and they get runny noses every other week. So there were many times that I'd have to keep them home from daycare. I couldn't predict my childcare needs in advance enough to not be using live-in childcare where we could be flexible with the hours. But the beauty of how things are set up is I'm not using her 45 hours to the max at baseline. So there's always and that's the flexibility of an au pair that I love, is that there's always a little buffer. Or when we were snowed in a month ago, it was, a complete change of things. And she didn't work, we were all home, but of course helped out as a family member would. Obviously it wasn't the most pleasant to be stuck in our house for 4 days in a row, but yeah, having the extra help there was also invaluable.
Like I said, we're here in Connecticut, so we're used to the snow, and we definitely get stuck inside for several days. And all of us, have been stuck inside. And I imagine you don't have the type of job where, if your kids are quarantined and can't go to school, that you can, work virtually. So it is nice to have that flexibility and not have to have that disruption in your schedule, when something like that happens. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. As a healthcare worker who sees the benefit of live-in childcare on a daily basis, is this something that you would recommend other healthcare professionals consider, the au pair program and National Interest Exemption during these times? And if so, why?
Yes. So it was recommended to me. I had my first 2 kids in medical school. And so when I was looking towards residency and I had to have take time off for my first son in medical school. My second one, I didn't. But otherwise, even then, is very difficult for having children. But residency, it's a short period of time in a physician's career, but it's so intense on the demand. And a lot of people time their children around it. But then even depending on what type of physician you are, it can even be more demanding, the hours you're away from home. So when I started to talk to other physicians, there's a huge proportion of us that use live-in childcare, one version of it being an au pair. And because of how the cost works with the different versions of live-in childcare, if you do something like a live-in nanny or a live-out nanny, that is often your only form of childcare, or it's just not affordable. So I want and needed the flexibility of both. And yes, I do counsel a lot of young physicians that are starting families, and a lot of them come to me because since I have 4 children that I had during training, they're like, how are you making this work?
Yeah.
And the answer is an au pair, unless they don't have a spouse that doesn't work, or 2 physician households. I work outpatient where it's just clinic Monday through Friday, and I don't have nights and weekends responsibility, but having call schedules or working weekends or something like that, you really run out of options for like nights and weekends on finding childcare. So it was recommendations from other physicians to me that kind of led us to this solution. There was a brief period of time I was begging my husband for 2 au pairs. I know some physician families that do that. He can talk me off the ledge that we can make it. That was like in the thick of my training, but I do know other 2 physician families that do that to make it work. Depending on what their hour needs are, that's my recommendation, and that's how I tell them that I make it work for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It really also just kind of depends on what your schedule is like, how old the kids are. You have older kids now too, so you can probably still make it work with just, with the one au pair. But yeah, I mean, NIE is a really great path for host families who are facing the front lines and are in need of flexible live-in childcare who, all the things that you're describing, like school being interrupted, a kid has a cold, they can't go to school for, 10 to 14 days. In some cases, they need a negative test. That's really disruptive to someone. And if you're not in a situation where you could easily work remotely, well, then, childcare is super important. So while the world continues to face uncertainty, it's like one less thing to have to worry about. What is something that your family has learned about another culture or country's customs from hosting au pairs?
We have had au pairs that have spoken several different languages. I would have loved to have learned a lot more language from each one, but my kids will pick up greetings and counting in several of the different languages. So that's been great. And then sharing food traditions has been an awesome exchange. Also, just having like another adult authority kind of figure that's not their parents, but that cares. So it's like an aunt or an uncle or other family member that they do have to listen to. So it's not just like a friend. I think that's been like the biggest exchange. So I hope it makes them a little more culturally aware as they are older. When they notice our au pair does something different than our culture, they're kids, they'll ask about it. Like,
Yeah.
oh, why are you doing that? Or why did you say it that way or something like that? And then they'll kind of share, oh, well, this is how we celebrate this or whatever. Hopefully just that process of learning and being exposed to another culture and being more open-minded is something that they take with them.
Exactly. I think that you just hit the nail on the head. It's just being exposed to the different cultures at such a young age. It really just opens their world, outside of what they otherwise would see. If you could describe your experience hosting an au pair in one word, what would it be? That's a tough one.
I would probably pick friendship just because it's a very interesting relationship. You're like kind of their boss, kind of their mom, kind of their friend. The au pairs we've been the most successful with, it's where that friendship is also there because you honestly deep down care about each other. That's been a journey for me. And I feel like I've grown in that respect. I mentioned that part of having an au pair was when my husband would be away. So like that's my other adult in the house to like talk to outside of the children. And that's what we tell au pairs when we interview them. Our au pair is free to do whatever she wants in her time off. But if you can enjoy your time in the house when you're not working as well with the people in the house, you'll be happier. And then when situations happen where you're stuck in the house, or when plans fall through to travel and stuff like that because of uncontrollable things happening in the world, that you're still having a great experience.
I love that. One of the things I always tell families is the best experience that we hear are the ones where the family, like exactly what you're describing, like welcomes the au pair like another member of the family and vice versa with the au pair. So much so that it's usually difficult for, the family and especially the children to say goodbye at the end of her, when her visa expires. Do you still keep in touch with some of your previous au pairs?
We do. I wish we had more time to video chat and stuff with them. And we had joked about doing a tour of Europe and visiting our different au pairs someday, because we kind of have, several different countries now where we have a contact. We had one au pair come back and visit, which was really cool. We're all obviously friends on social media, so they kind of keep track of what's going on with my kids. It was my son's birthday on Friday, and I had a text at 7 a.m. from our au pair from Italy wishing him happy birthday.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. And I love to hear all the stories. One of the things that I recently learned that came out in a report that a separate company did where they interviewed close to 7,000 au pairs and 7,000 families just across all the agencies, not just Au Pair in America, was that the au pairs learned so much from the parents, just professionally, just even how to budget, how to things that they can take back regardless of whether or not they're going to follow like a early childhood education path, whatever their career is going to be. They learned so much from the family. So it's really just amazing. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your story. And thank you for being such a great host family and contributing to our mission to promote cultural exchange. Thank you to our audience for joining us to hear about these healthcare heroes experiencing hosting an au pair with Au Pair in America during COVID-19, particularly regarding the National Interest Exemption. For more information about hosting an au pair, feel free to visit aupairinamerica.com, and we'd be happy to chat with you further about the National Interest Exemption. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and obviously you know where to find us if you guys need anything, and thank you for being such a great host family, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Bye. Take it easy.